If you've seen any of my Warhammer reviews, then you'll know that I take a great deal more interest in the video games in universe rather than the original way of playing it. As much as I love the look of tabletop gaming and the endless possibilities of pen and paper RPGs, I never got into it myself as I didn't know who to play with. And the same applies to Shadowrun.
Now I'll admit, my first experience with Shadowrun was with the first-person shooter based loosely on the events of the tabletop game. I remember its release being a big thing as it was one of the first, if not the first game where console players could play online with PC gamers. Granted, it sucked because the PC gamers had keyboards and mice which kicked ass in every way, but I had a load of fun with it nonetheless. Even if most of it was in single player. With bots. On easy mode. With no story at all.
It wasn't until a few years later that I was introduced more formally to the lore by Noah Antweiler, a film and video game critic who has a series called Countermonkey. Essentially it's just his tabletop RPG experiences and anecdotes, but it taught me a lot more about the game than the FPS did.
And I'm really glad that I listened to his stories about Shadowrun because even though I have no friends to play the TTRPG he was with, I could still enjoy the video games, and where better to start with Shadowrun Returns. The name itself provokes discussion when it has two meanings: one, it's a direct sequel to the SNES and Genesis game, and two, it was a successful Kickstarter campaign which ensured its future. Since then there's been two standalone expansions, Dragonfall and Hong Kong, and judging by what I gotta say about this game, I'll probably cover them later. It's weird because Shadowrun isn't normally my kind of game, but the lore is absolutely amazing. Essentially, it's a cyberpunk world filled with fantasy elements like orcs, elves, dragons, and magic. Add to that the depravity of the world, the extensive history of crime, and the noir-like storytelling, and you've got this setting that's hard to get away from. I'm not qualified enough to talk about the general themes, and I can only tell you what's in the game itself, but it's easy for newcomers to pick up nonetheless. Regardless of your character's race, gender, skills, or beliefs, you start the game as a Shadowrunner, criminal types who will take on all kinds of illegal jobs provided that the price is right. The customization from the start of the game allows you to choose if you're a human, elf, dwarf, troll or orc, as well as your gender, your appearance and your skill set. Now I should just point out that Shadowrun doesn't have your typical leveling up and class system, instead it revolves around karma points, deities and abilities. There's a huge variety of character classes such as street samurai, deckers, adepts, mages, shaman, most of which can be broken down to melee spellcasters or technicians, but they all play an important role. I first chose a shaman for the ability to summon creatures, and while it's pretty cool, I regretted my choice later on. But at the same time, I couldn't choose a favourite class as they all have their ups and downs. Mages are great for offensive magic but can't heal as well as shaman and vice versa, and samurai use guns as well as technicians, but they all have their own special abilities like melee and using the matrix. Sadly, there's little synergy between the classes, meaning that everyone has their role and never shies from it to aid another. At least they're all viable for any of the difficulties, though the harder you choose to play, the more variety you want. Karma's great for making that variety happen as well. You can only apply points to your own character rather than your crew. You can mix and match to your heart's content. Despite not liking my shaman all that much, I loved boosting her efficiency with firearms, her ability to dodge and coerce. The Karma interface is unintuitive to begin with, and I wasn't sure what choices were right, as I found in games like this there are indeed objectively incorrect builds. Thankfully, Shadowrun Returns makes nearly all of your choices worthwhile, but don't go picking melee skills for a caster, and the same way in reverse. But there's no point in me telling you all this without getting to the meat of the game and while you'll be using all these abilities. Shadowrun is a very deep game, one that requires a lot of concentration and reading, so expect to use your skills in dialogue, even your combat ones like strength and charisma, to be able to avoid fights with them. And when I say a deep game that requires a lot of concentration and reading, I mean that you'll be spending most of your time reading quest text. No, not listening to quest givers and your companions, I mean reading. There's no voice acting whatsoever, perhaps only screams of agony when you're hitting combat, so expect to strain your eyes a fair bit. Early in the game, the dialogue options are really good as you can use quickness, brute force and coercion to get bonuses from NPCs, but this doesn't take long to fade. Before long you're wading through text and using dialogue options to change the conversation, if only slightly. It's a neat little touch, if insignificant most of the time. I'm making a point about the amount of text in the game because it doesn't lead to much. There's so much fluff, so much padding that it can make or break your enjoyment of the game. At first I hated it and I just wanted to get into the combat, though I'm easily immersed in stories like this, which made me put up with it until the fighting started. So what exactly is the main plot? Well, we've already established that you're a Shadowrunner, or more specifically, a Shadowrunner without money. You need a big break and you'll get it at the start of the game by hearing from a friend. Unfortunately for you, the circumstances are pretty dire. Your friend Sam Watts has been killed and has made a dead man switch, a contingency so to speak. If he's killed, he's got some money locked away to be paid to the person who avenges him, encouraging you to take on the bounty, be it out of some sense of honour or because you're in need of the cash. For the record, the name Sam Watts might be familiar to players of the classic game because he's the protagonist of the SNES and Genesis version of Shadowrun. As I've not played that, I can't say what he's like, but there's a lot of conflicting opinions on his nature in this game. Some say he's a great if self-destructive guy, and others claim he was a horror. The theory is Sam's murder was caused by none other than the Emerald City Ripper, a killer who uses a scalpel to remove his victims' organs. In an age where laser tools are common for surgery. Thrown into this are other Shadowrunners, gangsters exploiting the scared people of 2050 Chicago, and a mysterious religion that is more than meets the eye. Seattle isn't the nicest place, at least in Shadowrun. In real life I'm sure it's lovely, but getting back to this, you'll find all kinds of gangs and security men who want nothing more than you dead. It's the combat where the game brings out the big guns, and even your first battles help you understand the core mechanics and get to enjoy them. See, Shadowrun Returns combat is turn-based with a heavy emphasis on using cover, and it revolves around hit points and action points. I believe hit points lean little in the way of explanation. When they reach 0, you get incapacitated. If you're not revived by a trauma kit or spell, you die. It's the action points which decide the pace of the fight though, as they determine how many moves you can make in a single turn. Most characters have around 3 or 4 action points, meaning they can move to any place in a certain radius, and the further they travel, the more points they use. Fighting also uses your action points, and different abilities will use them, be they melee, firearms or spells. Both you and the enemy have this resource, and it's important you keep in mind the latter, as you'll need to use abilities that don't just hamper their health pools, but also their action points. Because buffs don't just come in the form of damage, accuracy, health or armor increases, but also action points. Hell, you can even remove action points from the enemy's next few turns, or put them to sleep temporarily if they've removed them all. Bear in mind that the enemies you face can do the same to you without batting an eyelid. Such equality in the resources and abilities really makes the battles a lot more exciting, as you don't have to worry about, say, a mage's mana being better than a warrior's fury in order to get out abilities. It makes the symbol combat really strategic, and as it goes on it becomes more complex but easy to pick up as you go along. What doesn't get better is the accuracy rating, which so many people hate, and while I'm not among them, I can attest to accuracy being a shitty stat a lot of the time. A lot of people just shrug this off as, that's XCOM for you with that particular game, but I just find it's a lame defense for a big issue. In almost every RPG I play where I can see hit rating or accuracy, if I'm gonna hit 99% of the time or whatever, or I'm facing someone at point blank range, it means I'm going to hit. But in Shadowrun, if you're so much as lower than 95% chance to hit, you can easily miss. You might think this is nothing more than an exaggeration, but it really is sporadic. Say I have an 80% chance of hitting someone. That doesn't feel at all different if I had a 70 or 60 or even 50% chance of landing a shot. This applies to all abilities regardless of your range or type of attack. But as I'm playing on the normal difficulty, it's not terrible, or at least as bad as many claim it to be. Whether that's because of the higher difficulties, I can't say, though I find it to be a cheap way to drag out the combat, which is as fine as is. Then again, the bad accuracy allows me to fight for longer, and as I love the battles, I can't complain too much. Though there's some fights which I just can't stand. One of the key features of Shadowrun, one of the defining factors which makes it what it is the Matrix. Now bear in mind this was before the film of the same name, heck even before Web 2.0, so it does sound a bit corny to begin with. You can literally become one with the internet if you're a decker, or if a member of your team happens to be. This allows you to hack into the Matrix and perform battles phased off from the physical realm. Sounds interesting, huh? Well, this is a problem that's existed since deckers and all kinds of TTRPGs came about, and the video game doesn't solve it. See, when you're fighting in this plane, the rest of the game kinda just stops. So everyone else outside of the Matrix is just sitting with their thumbs up their arses for hours waiting for you to do your thing. Most of the time it's mandatory and you'll need to use your skills to unlock safes, find key information, or perhaps crack an electronic safe. Inside though, you'll face firewalls and safeguards, and you'll have to use your abilities unique to the Matrix to fight the defenders. While it sounds pretty neat, it just adds more arsing about. I mean, you already need medkits, revival tools, spells, grenades, drones, and repair kits, so having to buy tools for a part of a mission that may or may not exist is just a pain. Graphics-wise, Shadowrun Returns is, well, just okay. There's nothing objectively bad, and even someone like myself who's fussy about art styles was fine with how it looks. But being this zoomed out most of the time to survey the battlefield, you can't really enjoy any of the smaller details like animations, character models, or anything really. The sound design was also pretty insignificant, which is a shock considering this is the same IP that brought us excellent music with the old console games. Hell, I played a fair few songs of the classic games throughout this review just to make it sound a bit more interesting.
Before we run to the shadows, it's time to inspect the mutilated corpse that is my final thoughts.
Shadowrun Returns didn't need to be as long as it is, as my playthrough lasted approximately 12 or 14 hours. I completed it in 4 very long sessions as I was so addicted to it, but there was also the fact that I didn't know that I could save during fights, and I wasn't allowed to skip conversations. There were a few times where I felt it was a good idea to put down the game, as there's loads of dialogue and it's hard to tell what's important and what you should remember, and that's the worst part about the game, the dialogue. It's not badly written, on the contrary, this is some of the best conversational stuff ever. But there's way too much of it and it gets in the way of the action. Literally 1/10 of the information you're given in each scene is something to go on, and it really doesn't matter when the game couldn't hold your hand any more than it does. Still, the combat's good and made even better when you start with it in the early mid sections of the game. The reliance on RNG makes for an interesting way of fighting, but on higher difficulties it could get to the point where you give up out of rational frustration. In a way, I feel the game was made to meet the price of £14.99 rather than the other way around, and the padding makes the game hard to recommend. If you've got the time to sit through the reams of dialogue and the patience to cope with unfair but satisfying combat, you'll have a great time with this, more so if you're willing to play it multiple times for the different playstyles.
Until the next time, I'm Johnbonne, your #1 source for #2 games. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got to prepare a downloadable discontent episode for the extra content. Ta-ta for now.